Hey guys, it's Alex, and I'm here with a review for the last book I read, which is A Walk Across the Sun by Corban Addison. This is an adult fiction novel about two girls from India whose entire family is killed in a tsunami. They are then kidnapped and sold into sexual slavery. The book follows them on their journey, as well as an American man who works for an NGO in India to help combat sexual trafficking and slavery. I initially picked this book up because of the gorgeous cover. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I love the earthy tones, and I think it's probably one of the most gorgeous covers that I own. However, the cover is probably my favorite thing about this book, which is not a good thing. I gave this book 2 stars. I'm going to start with the positives because after the beautiful cover, there are so few. Pretty much the only positive thing about this book was that it was entertaining. It did hold my interest, and it was a fairly quick read once I got into it. It didn't drag on. It was very fast-paced. I never really felt bored at any point while reading it, which is a very positive thing, because I think one of the things that differentiate a 2-star read from a 3-star read is boredom. However, I still gave this book 2 stars, but that probably did save it from being a 1-star read for me. Now that all of those positives are out of the way, I'm going to talk about the negatives for this book, and there are quite a few. My biggest problem, above everything else, above the writing issues, above the characters and the plot and the pacing, my biggest issue was that this book is full of white savior trope. I was hoping that it was going to be much more nuanced than it was, but I don't understand why Thomas, the American man who works for the sex trafficking NGO, the book follows him. He's the main character, not Ahalya or Sita, who are the 2 Indian girls who are trafficked. They do get their own chapters and have POV at points throughout the story, but Thomas is the main character. I didn't care about Thomas at all. I didn't care that his infant daughter died or that he was having relationship problems with his wife. It felt like the only reason we were following him was because he was a white man and it made the story more palatable. And he just traveled around the world trying to save these girls. Like, this is the most white savior trope I've ever read. He was literally the white savior, and it got pointed out by a character in the book, an Indian man who was his estranged wife Priya's father, pointed out the white savior trope at one point in this book, and Thomas got really upset and really angry, went off on a rant about how he wasn't a racist and no, he didn't deserve to be called a racist. And it was not self-aware at all. No one called him a racist. I was just taken aback, we were clearly supposed to be on Thomas's side. And her father didn't say anything bad. He just made an offhanded comment about how, oh look, it's another white man come to save us. It was very cringe. And I did look up Corban Addison and his other books, and it seems like that rings true for every book he's ever written. All of them center around an American, I'm assuming a white American, although I don't know, who goes to another country and saves children from sex trafficking. This seems to be a recurring theme for him. And I'm definitely not going to be picking up any of his other books for this reason. It was just so awful to read. And he wasn't even an important character in the book. He was a legal intern who was new to this organization, who didn't even do anything. He would just constantly ask, hey, can I tag along to this court case? Can I tag along on this raid? And the people in charge would be like, well, I guess if you don't get in the way, you don't do anything, you just stay behind everyone else and shut up. I didn't know why he was the main character. The only thing he really did to help save Sita, he went to Paris and he showed around her photograph and eventually found someone who had seen her. And that was the only thing he did that wasn't just watching someone else do the work. And it just seemed entirely pointless. His part in the book could have been shrunk down into 30 pages, and then they could have expanded on other issues and other pacing issues. This would have been a better book if Thomas hadn't been in it or had only played a very minor role. And also, still on the same point, because this was my biggest problem and a very long point, the main character, Thomas, is a white male lawyer from Virginia who works for an NGO to fight sex trafficking. The author is a white male lawyer from Virginia who works for an NGO to stop sex trafficking. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that this feels like a self-insert hero fantasy. This feels like it was written by a man who imagines that he does more to help trafficking victims, that he imagines that he runs around the world and chases them down and like saves them from being raped. And it really felt like this is just his daydream about like what he does instead of what he actually does, which is probably just he's a paper pusher, would be my guess, because that's what the main character Thomas was. It also had really bad pacing issues. The only time the book ever slowed down was when it was writing about Thomas, but every other chapter was told from the point of view of Ahalia or Sita, or both of them, as they sort of were dragged into the world of sex trafficking and slavery. So much happened during their chapters. Most of the action of the story was told through Ahalia and Sita's chapters, which was probably about half or a little bit less than half of the book, because it did feel like Thomas sort of took up more than his fair share. At the very beginning, in the first chapter, Ahalia and Sita are with their family at their home when a tsunami hits. The tsunami kills everyone that they know. It's only given a few paragraphs to describe the tsunami and to describe them seeing the dead bodies of their father and their mother and their housekeeper and like literally everyone in their town. It's literally only given a few paragraphs, and that's not just the tsunami. That was a lot of the big action scenes, a lot of the big dramatic things that happened. They were kidnapped and taken by a man they don't know to a house they didn't know, and that was only given a few paragraphs. And it felt like Thomas's part needed to be about 30 pages of the book, and the other 150 pages that he took up should have been given to these scenes to lengthen them and give them more time. It was way too fast, and it came across as very fake for that reason. The writing was also very pretentious. This was something that was a much bigger issue early on, and then it sort of eased throughout the book, which is why I didn't talk about it up front. But the first chapter of this book was rough to read. It was so pretentious. He talked around things instead of just saying them. And it was very much like those dramatic lines from books that are really deep and sort of talk about the human condition and are the lines that sort of like become quotable and go on all the merch for that book or series or whatever. And they are wonderful lines. They're very well written and beautiful. But imagine an entire book written solely of those lines. And that's kind of what this started out as. And I was very concerned it was going to stay that way. But it sort of felt like as the story went along, A, I did get more used to his writing style, even if I never really enjoyed it. But B, he definitely eased up a lot there. And as the story went along, it felt like he got more into it and stopped trying so hard to have beautiful, elegant writing, and he just sort of wrote naturally, which was a lot better. But I still think, like, throughout the book, it was still very pretentious. Just the first line of this book, I had to read 3 times to understand what he was saying, because he really did like to talk around the subject instead of just saying it outright. I have to speak very carefully of this because I don't want to give out any spoilers for this book for anyone who does want to read it. Towards the end, it felt like the book became a race to save Sita from being raped for the first time. And that really made me uncomfortable. It felt like saving her would be less of a priority after she'd been raped for the first time. And I do understand that they wanted to save her from this traumatic experience. But it was like, even if they don't get to her before then, like, it's still worth saving her. It doesn't become any less important to save her just because this one traumatic thing has happened. And she'd already been through so much over the course of weeks or months. The timeline in this was slightly unclear. But I really don't like when books about girls who've been kidnapped sort of feel like they become this race against time while the girl is still a virgin. It was written like rape was the ultimate bad thing that could be done to her, and after that she would be ruined, so they needed to save her before then, which was really very gross. The final things I wanted to talk about were all fairly small things, but that did irritate me throughout the books. The first was that this was clearly a book about women being raped as written by a man, and that was something that was impossible to ignore throughout the book. And also, he never once mentioned boys or men being trafficking victims. This book spanned a lot of human trafficking, not just sexual trafficking in this town in India. It included that, but it also included It also included human trafficking for drugs and for manual labor, and sex trafficking across continents. Various races, various nationalities, Russian and Eastern European as well as American, and it was very strange that never once in this entire 350-page book did he ever mention boys or men being trafficked. Was in the acknowledgments or in his author's note at the very end, like after the book was over. He mentioned like the typical party line, millions of men, women, and children are trafficked every year. But never once in the actual book itself did it even reference that boys or men could be trafficked, and that really did bother me. Overall, I gave this book 2 stars. I just had a lot of issues with it, and I really didn't like what he did with it, or even his writing style. I didn't like the story. I didn't like that this was a story about sexual trafficking, largely in India, as written by a white man. It may have been fairly accurate, but I don't think it was the right story to tell or very well done. I really wouldn't recommend this as a story. I'm sure if you're just looking for something easy to learn a little bit about human trafficking, this would probably teach you. Honestly, you could probably read a lot of other books, or even just other non-fiction books, I think, would be better written and tell the story better. I wouldn't recommend this to anyone, and I will definitely not be picking up any more of his books. Let me know down below if you've read this book and what you thought of it if you had. I'd be curious to see what you guys think. As always, thank you so much for watching and commenting. I love to hear from you, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye!